Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes. Bom
Yeah,
dia.
good. So welcome everybody. My name is Luiz. I am the rector of St. Luke's, which is located in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in several places over the course of its time. So it's a very curious case of a parish without a home, which we hope will be resolved soon. So I need to tell a little bit about the history of our church. Um, Prior to 1933, the newly occupied southern part of the city of Rio, the one that is nowadays more um, widely known because of the beaches and all of that, didn't have an Episcopal church. And our church started as a preaching point in the homes of different families. It was planted by Redeemer in Tijuca and St. Paul the Apostle in Santa Teresa. Um, in 1933, it was officially founded as a mission, and it shared the building with, well, it rented space from Union Church, which is a church that still exists, not in that location. It moved to the suburbs of the city, but it is a pan-Protestant church for English speakers in Rio. But St. Luke's was for Brazilians in general, using Portuguese as the main language from the beginning. Right, there are a few pictures of that, and the first priest in charge was the Reverend Franklin Thorpe Osborne, sometime Episcopal missionary, sometime the president of the Brazilian Bible Society. In 1945, this mission acquired parish status, and soon after that, it moved to the place where it stayed for the longest time of its existence, which was Christchurch. Christchurch is a very peculiar case of a church because it's an English-speaking Anglican church that started as as a Church of England chaplaincy. Those happen all around the world, right? Even if there was a Brazilian Episcopal church somewhere. There is some noise coming from somewhere. Okay. Do you all hear me? I don't know if it's some. Okay, good. Despite not having a church building, St. Luke's was promoted to parish status. So after that moment, it started sharing the same building with that Church of England chaplaincy. But after, after a few decades, it took a different turn. In the 50s, it experienced consolidation and growth. Membership really started to grow, and we have the first records. That's the page you may see there of a capital campaign for a permanent church building. So that's when the permanent church building fund officially started in the 50s. Later, part of this fund was converted into apartments for rent. So it didn't just vanish, but it started as a fund back in those days. In the 60s, the parish experienced a lot of social engagement and mission. Um, it started like most of Rio, the southern zone see lots of inequality between the rich and the poor. So that's the period of time when you have a boom of city residents, and many end up living in slums. So St. Luke's opened several mission points in nearby slums. One of them eventually became a parish. When the slum was moved to Cidade de Deus, it became a parish over there. It was planted by us. The first steps towards full inclusion of women in leadership were taken in the 60s, and also the inclusion of people who were divorced, which was a major problem in Brazil back in the day. It was not allowed by law for somebody to remarry. So it was in the 60s the church was in the forefront of all of those movements back then. And that's especially the time when it experiences with more of a contemporary modern Catholic liturgical style. Um, In the 70s and in the 80s, you start having the early signs of crisis in terms of space and rental. Because until then, I hear this from old parishioners and from a lot of people. There was this expectation that eventually the two churches would function together. But what happens is when the Brazilian province became an independent province, Christchurch remained an English speaking chaplaincy. And for a few times, it was offered to them the possibility to become a parish of the Diocese of Rio, and they never really wanted to do that. They continued as a special chaplaincy. And in that regard, St. Luke's didn't have a church building, but at the same time, it was a full fledged congregation and a parish of the diocese. And in the 80s, it started losing its space that it shared with Christchurch. So some of the rooms were asked by the society that owns that plot of land and everything that functions there, especially because the British school is also there. They were kind of space needy, and St. Luke starts to see its office space being reduced and also worship space being changed to just a few times per week, very limited days and times of the day for it to happen. In the 90s and in the 2000s, you see two very long rectorships. Both of them became bishops. Both of them are alive. Bishop Celso is still our assistant, is part of the assistant clergy team, and the other one, Bishop Eduardo, is the diocesan bishop of Rio. It saw continued growth in terms of inclusion and social acceptance. So that's the moment when you see more of social and racial integration in church leadership. So some of the people from the missions that had been planted, they get vestry roles and become lay leaders. It's also the time when the church starts welcoming in a vocal way the LGBT community, and but at the same time, with very limited rental space and very limited possibilities of worship, you start to see an aging congregation. The 8:45 a.m. only Sunday spot that we had for 1 hour for Sunday worship is just not enough to attract the younger generations, despite all of that. And so, on one hand, you have a church that wants to do a lot. On the other hand, you have to listen. Uh, And then in 2017, the church took a very bold step, which was to stop renting space from Christchurch and to go to another church where a more, feasible Sunday worship possibility could be available. So those pictures are from the time with Christchurch, the last 20 years. You can see it's a magnificent building, cathedral style, and all of that. And we moved to a Presbyterian church in Copacabana, not very far from the other one, with a more generous Sunday time slot, and you see some of the pictures over there. And in 2021, but this move to this other church was meant to be a temporary move. The idea was to gather the assets that came from those funds that eventually were turned into property, because at a certain moment it was expected that there would be a better agreement between the two churches, St. Luke's and Christchurch. Um, but the vestry, with the pandemic and with the move to fully online services, and that in Brazil took longer than anywhere else in the world because we really didn't have, we never left the peak of the pandemic, to be clear. So after like 10 months paying for rent at a place that was not ideal either, we only had a time slot. It was a better time slot. We only had a time slot. We had no parking place over there. We had to park on the street. After so much time, we clearly decided to, take a bold step and just vacate the building, ask for another parish in the diocese to host our possessions in a room, and eventually use that building for some emergency services and continue online and try to sell everything we have and to purchase uh, whatever we can that will be our church home. So, um, who are we? So these are some facts and figures. I have added a few pictures. These pictures are from uh, some of those services when we had them at Bethesda Presbyterian Church. Um, the map shows the area of the city that's covered by the parish. There's no other Anglican church there, so a merger with a nearby parish would leave a whole area of the city without any Anglican presence, which we do not expect it to happen. During the pandemic, we have an average, I guess we can say an average Sunday attendance of 23 connections, even if some people, more than one, join the same connection, right? And the average age of the congregation is 47, which is way above the Brazilian average, which is 33, but that has already decreased with the five most recent confirmation, not five most recent confirmations in terms of people, but in terms of confirmations in event, bishops' visitations. So to confirm 2 and 1. So the 13 people that had an average of 31 years of age lowered a little bit of the average age. It was way below 50s until like 3-4 years ago when we went out of Christchurch. Pledging has remained constant over the course of the last few years, and during the pandemic, it actually had a slight increase. And part of the reason is because of our campaign for the new church building. It's, like I said, a very important area in terms of urban development and tourism, and it's also known for its social inequality. So you will see the extreme rich and the extreme poor living almost next to each other. So from anywhere in this part of town, you can see the sprawling slums on the cliffs of the hills and the very luxurious condos near the beach. So it's an area full of contrasts. Apart from worship, it is involved, and despite all of those limitations in terms of space, it is involved with a lot of service and social actions, such as donation of food baskets of staples to vulnerable families, sponsorship of needy children, especially during Christmas time. We actually help 2 houses for the elderly, and one of them is owned by the diocese, and professional training of transgender people at risk, including our own brand of liturgical garments that are produced by some of them who graduate from the fashion design class. So to provide them a job or a trade skill in the market. And the constant distribution, at least 2 to 3 times a month, of lunch boxes for people who are in a situation of food insecurity, and that has been a major problem caused by the pandemic. So these are some pictures of some of our activities and social interaction. And this is the dream. So this house is on sale, and we have it secured for 1 year. We have a contract that guarantees that we have the right to buy this house for 1 year if we gather all the money that we need, which is 1,300,000 reais plus 100,000 reais in taxes. That's more or less a little less than $300,000. It is big enough to hold, when converted into a church, to hold 100 to 120 people seated in it. And it's because of its specific location and the characteristics of the building, it has to be cheaper than any regular house because zoning laws do not allow it to be destroyed for anything. It would have to be refurbished from the inside. So what usually gathers a lot of money, a house like that could easily be like the price of 5 million reais or 6 million, 5 times that price, is the possibility of turning it into an apartment building, which this one cannot because of zoning laws, which is good for us. So the price is much lower. We have we have two apartments that are in the process of being sold. Part of that, fund, and also we've been raising money over the last months to try to gather what we need to finish this purchase within the time of a year, which is more or less $40,000. That's what we still need of all the almost $300,000. And then we would need more money for renovations, but at this point we just want to occupy somewhere and continue with our mission. I don't know if you expected some of this when we joined this group. All of those things were happening as we spoke together, vacating what we had rented because it wasn't a good fit. We were spending too much money on it, like almost half of our monthly pledge, with some rent that was useless, money that we could save for something else, and trying to sell to the property that we have, the two apartments, the two lofts, and to find a reasonable place where the church could finally find its permanent home. That also means this church will not have a parish house because one of them was purchased as a parish house. So it will have to be refurbished on the inside, and we have a plan later to convert the third floor. It has 3 stories into an apartment building in case there is a need for clergy, which I think it's gradually going to be more and more unlikely in the scenario we see here in Rio, where most clergy have a part-time job and work somewhere else. And how you could help. That's why we're here, part of this network of churches. One of the ways we could help each other is prayer, because when we share those difficulties, I guess lots of people hear about the difficulties, and especially the difficulties in the current Brazilian scenario, that we have been hit so hard by the pandemic. I recall doing 4 funerals within the time frame of a week. Of course, not all of them were church members, but they ended up being like church related somehow. And then the next week, another, 3 other funerals. So we saw very dark times in front of us, and we still have what I would consider a lot of political turmoil with current leadership. So prayer is also good. It's always good, and it's always necessary. Uh, and companionship, like mutual support. That's what I'm seeking from this group, because I know you have very similar stories of difficulties and struggles to spread the gospel. And also, if anybody wants to contribute or to sponsor a loan possibility of or a grant possibility, we are very eager to hear about that, because we still need, in practical terms, we need to finish those $40K to get the money to buy this house until the end of next year. So all sorts of possibilities are also very welcome in that regard. This is the website, the email. If we have like Instagram and Facebook, and I'm open to all sorts of conversations that might come out of this presentation and all the questions you may have, including about the Brazilian scenario and the Episcopal Anglican Church of Brazil as well. So thank you.
So, well, all I can say is that having got over the difficulty of changing prayer languages, because I'm Brazilian, in spite of the name and so on, I'm Brazilian, but I have always prayed in English. And this was, I think, my major difficulty, was connecting the 2 languages in that respect. Apart from that, São Lucas is a great church. It really is a great church. I was a member of Christ Church for, I don't know, 60 years. And I never felt as much as home as I did at São Lucas. So we have hopes. We have hopes that we will managed to buy the house that will be our church, and carry on from there.
And did Louise say that you were a warden? Could you explain what that means and what your job involves?
I am not absolutely sure what that job involves. I think it means being available to help in any possible way. Basically, I think that's what it is.
To join in a lot of meetings with people.
And as you notice, I'm the junior warden, so I take orders.
And somebody's saying that you speak the King's English. I don't, so it's up to you. So they want to know a little bit about you and your, family history, probably.
Well, it's like so many people, so many Brazilians whose grandparents came from somewhere else. My paternal grandparents came from England. My grandmother was Scottish and my grandfather was English. And my maternal grandparents, my grandmother was Danish and my grandfather was Portuguese. So this results in your quite average Brazilian, because everybody's grandparents or great grandparents came from somewhere else. I was brought up in Brazil. I studied at Brazilian schools. I did not, like so many people of my generation, I was not sent away to school in England or anywhere else. And I've lived here all my life. So that is my background. But in spite of the name, which is foreign and causes great interest everywhere I go, I'm Brazilian. So I'm average. We have a couple of other members of St. Luke's who are exactly the same, whose grandparents came and who were originally Christchurch and then became St. Lucas. So we are at St. Lucas, we're a mixed bunch. There are all kinds of people.
We're truly a mixed bunch. I would like to invite, and by the way, my grandparents were Portuguese and Spanish, but my grandfather was a Portuguese American. So hence my accent. I don't speak with the King's English. He went to Ellis Island. He arrived on Ellis Island when he was 9 years old. And he studied at Episcopal boarding school in Alexandria and then at Cornell University. Then he came to Brazil. So we're all like people with several different roots and origins. But I would like to, if you don't have any questions, any further questions, Felipe wants to talk. Now he wants to talk. I have asked him as a private message if he would like to talk a little bit about his experience. So Felipe could talk to us a little bit as well, so you get to know another parishioner.
Hello, everybody. Well, I started to go to San Lucas in 2017. It's not so long ago as Anne, for example. I'm not English or American descent. Actually, my family is very Brazilian. I just have great grandparents that came from other parts of the world. And for me, the Episcopal Church and St. Luke's means like a reconnection to the Christianism and to God, because I raised in a very closed church here in Brazil, I don't know if you know, but in the last decades, there was a very big expansion of the evangelical church in Brazil, and there are a lot of very close churches. Something that explains a lot of our 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 actual issues here in Brazil. And this church was well, my childhood was really different than another children, because in my early childhood I could not have television in my place, for example, my place. It was a very restricted church, and growing up and as a gay person in that um, in that place was a little bit complicated even today. Nowadays, this church is not so closed as in the past. They have television and other things, but they still very close to a lot of things. And when I was teenager, I had sponsorship to go to Germany, and then I came back to Brazil. I decided, no, I'm not going to church anymore. Maybe God doesn't exist, because the things that happened to me were terrible. But there was something missing. There was something missing in my life, and there was no place here that I felt very like welcome. Well, yeah. And a friend that was missionary here, Brian, he was missionary in another parish close to my place in the north zone. I don't live in the south zone where San Luke is. He was not from Brazil, he was from Puerto Rico. And he invited me to go there. And it was fun because I tried to go a lot of times in his parish in here, the All Saints, I think is the name in English. No, sorry, the Holy Trinity, maybe. And there was always something that happened that I couldn't go to the mass. So after he came back to Puerto Rico, I asked him, and I was in a very complicated moment of my life, and I asked him, "Oh, I would still like to go to the church," but he said, "Oh, you better go to San Luke, because there you'll be more welcome." And since the first day, it was very touching for me, because for 8 years or more, I didn't enter to a church, and when I remember to today everything about the mass in this day. People were very nice to me, and after the mass, I talked to a lot of people. In my mind, I was a little bit anxious and scared, because I thought, oh, this is Episcopal church, an English church, maybe they are closed, or but people weren't like that. It was completely the opposite of what I was thinking, and I stayed there until today. I've been helping in the Transfig project, and this was really something that changed my perception of the world, because I've been there with people who never had no opportunity, that that they didn't have family. Thanks God, I had a supportive mother, and also father. But there in this project, there are a lot of people that never had the opportunity to see another kind of Christianism, because here the words that people from minorities that they listen from Christianism are really hard words, and a lot of people that wish that people from minorities die, for example. When I read the comments on Facebook nowadays here in Brazil, it's terrible. Yesterday, I read something like that, like people. There was a humorist, can we say that, a comedian in Brazil that died this year, and people, because he was gay, he was homosexual, a lot of people say a lot of terrible words, and they say that it was a punishment from God, and this type of things, and worse things also. And yes, I think not just because of it, but St. Lucas, there is something very special with this community, and I feel very welcome there. My mother, who is from a very evangelical church, my grandfather was a missionary from the Brazilian evangelical church. She loves also the church. She doesn't go every day because nowadays she goes to the Baptist church, but she feels like comfortable. The first reaction when I said to my mother that I was going to the Episcopal church, she was like, "Oh, but they are kind of Catholics." But when she met people from there and she talked, she feel also very comfortable. I've been part in a very interesting project before the pandemic, which was the Santa Lídia, which was with young people, and for a period it was in a co-working place with a lot of artists, and it was interesting because nowadays in Brazil, the image that people have from Christianism is like from the Neo-Pentecostalian church, and when they saw a different way to have, because when we had these reunions, it was not something very strict liturgy, but it was something very spontaneous. The people were encouraged, Luiz or Caetano, which was another priest, exactly. Sometimes when I speak with people, because I learned German better than English, I start to think in German. and then I translate it to English, and not every time it helps. And they start talking a little bit about the text of the Bible, and then people were encouraged to talk what they were feeling about it. And it was a very unique moment because even people who were very they had problems with religions. They were atheists. I don't know. They we had like a moment that we had communion, like, and they had and some of them they didn't stay going. They didn't keep going to the church, but they say to other people that had interest to go, and they didn't know the existence of a church that they could um, um, have their faith. And what I think the importance of St. Luke's, besides everything that was told today, is also because we are in a place of the city that everything that happens is highlighted to the country, and everything that happens in Copacabana, people know in other parts of Brazil, and we have also Episcopalian churches in another states, and when we go to a faith parade, I don't know how to say that in English, which is a parade if people from other religions, and when when the Luiz is there, if he's vest announce
It's just that we had Copacabana Beach is the #1 spot for all sorts of protests in Brazil. So when we have protests for religious diversity or for, I don't know, climate change, or, being close to that has allowed the church to be present at those events. So, Earth Day or religious diversity parade, or, anything that happens usually happens there. Everything. So I guess that's what he was trying to say. Sorry to interrupt you, Philippe. I was just trying to explain the context.
Exactly.
Sorry. Do we have, I don't know if I have any other parishioner who would want to say something, but I know that people have limited time, so I don't want this to be dragged for too long. So maybe if somebody has a question, I don't know. We're here to answer them.